back, everyone. This is The Changelog, and I'm your host, Adam Stacoviak. This is episode 132, and on today's show, we have Dave Kaneda joining us to talk about buckets. It's his project he's building on assembly. It's a CMS built on Node.js. Great show today for you. Our sponsors for the show are CodeShip, DigitalOcean, and TopTal. We'll tell you a bit more about DigitalOcean and TopTal later in the show, but CodeShip, hosted continuous deployment service that just works. You can easily set up continuous integration for your application in just a few steps and automatically deploy when all your tests pass. CodeShip has great support for lots of languages, test frameworks, as well as notification services. They easily integrate with GitHub or Bitbucket and can deploy to cloud services like Heroku, AWS, Nodejitsu, Google App Engine, or even your own servers. Setup takes just 3 minutes. Get started today with their free plan and make sure you use our code, the Changelog Podcast. Again, the Changelog Podcast to get a 20% discount for 3 months on any plan you choose. Head to codeship.io/thechangelog and tell them the Changelog sent you. And now, on to the show. All right, we're back. This is Adam. I got David on the line as well. Jerod on the line. Jerod, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
Got sort of a bum voice this time around, so we'll keep your talking to a minimum. But David Kaneda is with us. Hey,
everyone.
He's no stranger to the show. David, you had to remind me, sorry, that you were on the show way back when.
That's okay. I think, what was it, 5 years ago? 4 or 5?
That was a very, let me go find the episode number. You were on episode 30, and that was like forever ago.
July 27th, 2010.
There you go. That's a long time ago. And you were talking about Sencha at the time too. So
yeah,
that jogs a memory.
I remember it was like a couple months after I first moved to California. And I've been here just about 4 or 5 years now.
Gotcha. And so we're having you on the show today because you're building an open source CMS on Node.js with MongoDB. You're building it on assembly. It's totally a side gig. So full time, you're a UX designer at Google. So you've got some history, and the world knows some, and probably uses several pieces of software that you've helped build or prop up and whatnot. But that's what we have you on the show today. I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago, we reached out and you weren't quite ready to come on the show, and now you're at what 0.7.0 now? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's still super early in the project, but yeah, I gotta tell somebody about it at some point.
Yeah. So I guess for those who don't know who you are and a bit more than what we just explained about you, how do you introduce yourself?
I say, in terms of like the whole title thing, I just say designer generally. Although, for the past 5 years or so, I definitely write way more code than I spend in Photoshop or anything like that now. But I identify as a designer. I started in print design, got into the web, started doing Flash, sort of all types of sites. And then sort of around that time, about 5 years ago, I did JQ Touch, which was a JavaScript library for creating native-like experiences on the iPhone. And then that just sort of led into a whole sort of avalanche of doing mobile work. And I think a lot of designers, especially like web designers, sort of fell down that path of getting into mobile.
What year was that? I remember being a JQ Touch user back in the day.
It was...
I remember being amazed by it too.
Thanks. I think that was like 6 or 7 years ago that first came out. And yeah, it blew me away, like in terms of, I just made this thing and I had, sort of vaguely seen and used open source software, but I just thought, what am I going to do? I'm not going to sell this thing, but I think it's powerful. So I put it out there, and, this is like a little bit of a humble brag, but I was just kind of blown away to see, thousands of people starting to use it.
Didn't that transition to something else at some point? It went from JQ Touch to something else, I believe, a paid product.
So two things. I basically, Sencha, which was called EXTJS, then hired me, and we formed a small team to work on Sencha Touch. And that was like commercial for like a month, and then it became free and all that. It's, some corporate stuff. And then And then JQ Touch itself was renamed to JQT at some point because somebody like got angry for some reason.
Crazy.
Trademarks.
What were you going to ask, Jerod, before I jumped in there?
I was just going to say, I think that it struck a chord. There was a big need, or at least we thought we had a need for those types of toolkits at that time, right when mobile just started kind of exploding.
It's funny these days because you still see them all the time. There's Ionic now. There's that one came out from the Bootstrap team, like Ratchet, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting.
So tell us about buckets.
I was going to say, this is it's being built on assembly. Let's dive into this product and what's happening.
So, I mean, I guess even before assembly, like buckets is just a thing I've wanted to do for a long time. I mean, I think I would imagine the majority of web designers have either wished for a better CMS or tried to build one, or, you know, it's definitely not a new issue or problem. But I just, as I left Sentia about 2 years ago, I had spent pretty much my entire time there doing this sort of front-end heavy JavaScript and CSS, you know, framework, and was kind of eager to get back onto doing some server-side logic, doing just building apps on both sides. And it was sort of just a thing. I toyed around with the idea, and about a year ago, I was a designer in residence at Benchmark, a VC firm here, and I sort of told them about it and what I wanted to do with it, and they expressed interest, possibly raising a seed fund or a seed round for it. And so they said, just get started, just, you know, build the thing, or at least like throw together a prototype, and we'll see where it goes. And after about a month of working on it, I just kind of like threw in the towel, because it was kind of isolating to just work on it, you know, day in, day out, here out of my house, and not sort of be sharing it. And the goal was always to open source it, but it just, you know, it had to run first. Anyway, so it was Matthew Smith, Whale on Twitter, who mentioned assembly, and I saw that about 6 months ago. And I thought, well, I love the idea. I've always just kind of loved the idea of mixing some sort of commercial incentive with open source. And I think there's, like, without a doubt, something to be done in that space. And so I thought this would be a great place to just throw buckets on there and see how people respond. Because, you know, I'd already basically given up on it, or not even given up on it, but just, you know, I had already burned myself out on it. And so in the beginning, it was really just to seek, you know, some sort of validation of the idea. Like, is this something people would be interested in?
Yeah, a lot of especially when you're getting started, especially when it's something like this that's sort of homegrown to a degree, and as you mentioned there, quite possibly something you might even give up on if it's not something that other people can sort of encourage you in. You sort of need a tribe to sort of validate whether it's something you should pursue or not. Like you said, it's a CMS isn't a new idea. Some of the questions I have are, you know, why this over others that are out there? What is this going to do better than some of those? But that'll come a bit later. But
sure,
I think if we can camp out just quickly on like taking it to assembly, I want to camp out there just for a little bit, because it's sort of being built by the community, as they say, being built by the assembly community, and that validated the idea. So about how long ago was that, and what was the initial reaction you got?
First, can you give us, for everybody, just a general thing of what assembly is, and then go into the details?
So assembly, and I think they're still pretty early on themselves, and so they're still figuring out. But the sort of high-level concept is, you know, you can create projects that are either open source or just like open source, where anybody can contribute. And that ranges from development, like directly on GitHub, or design mocks, or marketing even, or copywriting. And you have bounties, which are similar to GitHub issues, you say, oh, we need this feature, or we need to be able to sign in with Facebook. And then as the project creator or as the core team, you're actually able to assign a value to that bounty. And Assembly sort of makes these values. They use sort of like a cute coin system, but ultimately it translates to just a percentage of the product's potential profit at one point. So as Assembly products start making money, they start to calculate a monthly profit fee and just simply distribute that every month to all of the coin holders based on how many they have.
That's a very sort of good thing, but it's still even hard for me to grasp it because it feels like it's potential, like you said, then you're not really sure how much it's going to be. It feels like it's sort of pie in the sky, at least to me, but that's why I'm not on Assembly contributing to anything. But it's a neat thing for those who have, like, one thing I liked about that though, of just outside of, the idea of not just contributing code, like if you go to the different bounties that are there, you can sort them by all these different things. And if we sort yours by different tags, you've got back end, front end, development, simple, challenging product, copy, marketing. That's kind of neat because, like, if I'm a marketing guy that wants to jump into a product, or I'm trying to, get some notoriety, some authority for my name, or I'm just starting out, I can hop on Assembly and start throwing ideas at different products here and land a team and have ownership.
Yep.
Is what you're saying with those coins on bounty or on Assembly.
Yep. And like you said, I think, like, I've always been sort of a general product kind of guy. I like design, I like marketing, I even like copywriting. And I've always sort of enjoyed both ends of it, whether you're doing the actual hands-on work or more of a directing, like sort of a creative directing position or something. And so, like, I think a great example is just our logo.
And that's actually a good thread. I like that one too.
A bucket, with a sort of a little smiley face kind of built in. And that was something, I mean, it's simple and it's straightforward. And a friend, John Peel, made that. But it was something I just kind of had a very rough idea. I think if you saw that thread, I actually just grabbed a photo off of Google image search, literally, like, took 4 minutes, drew some eyes on it and said, here's kind of like the concept I'm thinking. And somebody illustrated it and with a great style to it. And I sort of wanted the yellow background and everything. But ultimately it came out as something that was just super simple, super friendly. And that's all I wanted it to be, and it was perfect.
You can see the riffing too, back and forth between you and the contributors and Whale, who you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Sort of the iterative process too, through this bounty / kind of GitHub issue-ish kind of thing. Yep. And so you can sort of see the morphing and even the collaboration. I like how neat it came out too. I think it's a good direction. But let's jump on sort of getting to Assembly. And what that did for you and your inertia towards buckets.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think just having people say, "Oh, hey, that would be nice," is a huge thing, because especially in the creating a product that is so overdone or done so many times, like even within the Node community, which is way newer, way younger than PHP or anything like that. Even within the Node community, there's already 4 or 5 sort of prominent, and still they don't really compare in terms of scope to WordPress or Expression Engine or Drupal yet. But still, there's competition kind of everywhere, and so when you're going to throw your hat in the ring, so to speak, and try to do your own. You first want to know, okay, is there somebody out there who would like to see it done differently or that kind of thing?
Yeah, when I searched for Node CMS on Google, there's several that came up, but one that looked like it was decent. And sorry if I haven't seen this one before. I'm not hanging out in the Node community too much, but enough to know it's there and what's going on there. Keystone.js was one of the examples, and they got a decent design. They've got, a decent product direction in terms of what is happening with it. So, like you said, it's not something that's new.
They terrify me.
They do?
No. No, it seems super cool. And
same feature set too. It's Node and Mongo. So
yeah, it's a similar kind of feel, I think.
Yeah.
And then just to throw out the others, like, well, there was one called Calypso, but it seems like that one died down, and that was never. I want to be nice on the show, but like it was never.
It's 404ing right now.
Too pretty. It was not like But then there's Ghost as well, which Ghost is tremendously beautiful. Kickstarter project, and it's very beautiful, well designed, and actually a very similar architectural setup to what we have, which kind of happened by happenstance. I swear I didn't copy them, but the interesting thing was always that I knew about Ghost when I started Buckets, but I actually wanted to do something that was kind of completely the opposite in some ways. So Ghost basically looked at something like WordPress and said, okay, this has grown to the point where it's not even really great for blogging anymore. So let's strip it back down to what made it great for blogging. Whereas with Buckets, I wanted to create a tool that was more for these big websites. When you're like a web designer and you have to do a website for a university or something, it's not so much about, okay, does it give you that single panel text area with a nice preview? It's more about, is the content structured correctly, and how easy is it for the end user to just input content?
Right. Yeah, there's pros and cons on both sides of that. That's where I was wondering too, what you might think of Ghost versus Buckets, because people tend to take a blog software and try to make it more than it is, and then you sometimes try to take a CMS and make it a blog software and a CMS, and they end up doing too many jobs and not enough focus on the end user and the content, because that's part of the huge piece of being a CMS too, is actually managing the content, not just theming or design. It's got several different.
Totally. Yeah. And I look at it as not to say that we'll never have a full page, full screen markdown editor similar to IA Writer or something like that. But that's definitely not going to be a place that we head soon. I see it in terms of the experience I want to deliver. And I think you bring up a good point in that CMSs have two audiences, which is sort of the content administrators and then the designers, the web designers.
Right.
And so for the content people, I want it to feel like Tumblr. And that was sort of a big inspiration for Buckets, was this idea that you go into Tumblr, you have these 5 sort of types of posts you can create, which are text, video, chat, photo, and link. And they're just extremely well-designed, well-tailored sort of input fields for these types of content. And then when you're working with a system like Expression Engine or Drupal or one of these bigger CMSs, you define content into these sort of distinct blobs in a similar way. But usually the UX just isn't even anywhere close to that Tumblr experience, right?
Right.
And so that's sort of the driving force for me on the content creator side, is to make it feel like that, to make more of a Tumblr than a Medium.
So I guess to those who, because we've had John Nolan on the show before to talk about Ghost, for those who think they might want to use Ghost versus something else, how does this differentiate from blogging software, I guess, in the bigger picture? It's full on CMS. What is some of the vision for the CMS pieces?
So a couple things. One, you create buckets and you define the fields on those buckets. So, you could create a recipe, and every recipe has a cover photo, a title, a list of ingredients, and a steps, let's say. And you can sort of fine tune those fields and manipulate those fields. And I want those fields to be sort of very rich at the end.
When you say manipulate, do you mean validation?
Validation, just sorting. Most fields come with a good amount of options, but there's still a lot of work to be done in that area. But essentially, that's the idea. As opposed to, every item in your CMS has a title, a body, and an excerpt. It's much more define it yourself. And so you end up with these forms that are just sort of very specific to your content.
That's helpful too. Like you said earlier on, whenever the designer, the builder of this throws it over the fence to the end user and says, okay, university, here's your site. They don't have to, give a ton of docs. It's like, go here and create and read the form.
Exactly. Like at the end of the day, that side of it, if you look at all social networks or, of a certain type that manage content, people use them every day and sign up for them by themselves and figure them out, right? And that essentially is what a CMS is. Like if you look at something like Pinterest, it gathers photos and puts them into this nice layout. But, that's essentially a theme, that grid that you get to the content that you're adding in. And there's no reason that a CMS can't provide that same ease to sort of get into it. Yeah.
Let's pause the show for a minute. Give a shout out to a sponsor, DigitalOcean, simple cloud hosting built for developers. In 55 seconds, you'll have a cloud server with full root access, and it just doesn't get any easier than that. Pricing plans start at only $5 a month for half a gig of RAM, 20 gigs of SSD drive space, 1 CPU, and 1 terabyte of transfer. That's a lot for $5 a month. DigitalOcean also has data centers all across the world: New York, San Francisco, Amsterdam, Singapore, and their newest region, London. You can easily migrate your data between those regions, making your data always closest to your users. Use the promo code ChangeLogNovember in lowercase. It's important that you use lowercase. ChangeLogNovember to get a $10 hosting credit when you sign up. Head to DigitalOcean.com right now to get started. And back to the show. So we're talking about some of the philosophies around it. And I think you might even say we're getting there. We're not quite there yet. Where exactly are you? We know you're at 0.7.0, but what does that mean? What's some of the features that are built out now?
Admittedly, development has slowed down the past couple of weeks. I think partly due to just getting into some stuff at the Google and sort of putting in some extra time. But also, I've been sort of, I guess, just mentally trying to figure out the next place. Well, I'll go back. So at first, like the first 2 months or so, the development was very heavy because I was sort of focused on that, the admin panel, which is sort of my, what I am best at focusing on in terms of like UI, UX, the JavaScript architecture. The whole thing is a single page app, which again, compared to a lot of systems out there, is a lot different, and which also means it's like sort of crazy fast when you're using the admin. So I worked on a lot of the sort of interface, which is still very basic, but kind of rich in a lot of ways. And then I worked on search for a little while. That actually hasn't even shipped yet. I've just kind of kept that off to the side because I'm still not 100% sure I want to go with Elasticsearch. But anyway, it was sort of just this, creating features, creating the template parser, which is sort of based on handlebars right now, and those types of things. And to the point where it can now create a very basic website. And we have maybe 6 or 7 different types of fields that you can add on to each bucket. So now I'm sort of hitting a point where I know that eventually I do want to offer this as a SaaS offering. The more I think about it, the more I think I'm in no place in terms of sysops to be sort of kicking off managed instances of buckets, because it is Node and it does have to run in a cloud environment. And so sort of the clearer and obviously much simpler path for buckets to take is to become sort of multi-tenant and to allow, multiple, not just multiple users, which it already supports, but multiple accounts that are all creating their own websites. And I've been wrestling with this idea for the past 2 weeks because on one hand, I want the system, and in some ways, even though it's very different in terms of being Node, the architecture, I want it to feel like WordPress or Text Pattern or those older PHP ones where, okay, I install it on my computer, I can run it at localhost, I move it to a server, I run it over there. Where if we switch to this sort of platform approach, obviously a lot of that ease sort of goes away.
It's a hard line to follow too when you make that choice, because it's going to impact. You work full time, right? So you got little time, and so the time you do spend, you want to spend on progress, not
exactly
hemming and hawing.
Now you're seeing exactly why I've been twiddling my thumbs a little bit the past week.
So
but
maybe you can come to some of these decisions here on the show. I don't know, but to me, I feel like it comes down to figuring out your target audience, right? Like, and that's sort of a question I have next is like, when you ship this, when it's ready, at whatever stage it's at, the 1.0, who is who's your short list of the kind of people that you're going to seek out? Is it people on Squarespace? Is it people using WordPress? Is it PHP developers that are tinkering with JavaScript and Node because of the ubiquitousness of it lately, and not lately, but just the trend of the upward trend of the last few years towards JavaScript? And, is it people that hack on Ruby that make their own stuff? Like, who's your customer?
Definitely web designers.
Okay.
And like 100% I can say, initially, people with HTML and CSS experience and who want to use HTML and CSS. The idea being that I've just always sort of thought content management, and especially when you look at these web content management systems, like, I don't think a lot of them handle that content creation side well, like we were talking about, sort of on the user experience angle. But then also on the web designer angle, or web developer, like grabbing that content and then like putting it into a page should be extremely easy.
Yeah.
And I've always personally just cringed when I see like WordPress templates using raw PHP, things like that. But
so you mentioned WordPress. Is there anything about WordPress that you've used before that sort of, because if you take the 37 signals approach, it's always like have an enemy, right?
Yeah.
And Don't Use Gantt charts was Basecamp's original thing, and that's sort of what kicked that off. And it was like, it's about conversations and people, and things to do, not Gantt charts and graphs and whatnot.
Totally.
So who's your enemy?
So it wouldn't be WordPress. I always just say WordPress because like when you're, it's the lowest common denominator.
50% of the net.
Yeah. So. But it's really Drupal. I would definitely, I would say Drupal.
Okay.
Anything that feels like
they've got a pretty cult-like following though. Like
they
anybody
do,
who does
it's a
use
giant
Drupal
community, and it's a somewhat kind of gross product. And I feel bad putting down anything, at any time, even on Twitter and stuff. But if I had to, obviously I'm making a competitor, so there has to be some stuff out there I don't like. But Drupal sort of represents that, you look like you're using PHP MyAdmin or some, like database administration tool. Yeah. And I would say even like systems that I'm really fond of, like Craft came out, and that came sort of out of the expression engine community. One of the developers, I think his name is Brandon Kelly, I hope I get that right, who did a lot of plugins, and sort of the most popular plugins for expression engine, made his own CMS. And it's really elegant. There's like a lot of extremely impressive pieces to it. But it's still, to me, just at a certain point, feels a little bit like just rows, tables of lists, and then you click and you're in a detail view, and, that very sort of straightforward database administration feel.
Well, now that we've talked a bit about, I guess, some of maybe your competitors, enemies, inspiration, however you want to word that, obviously you're building this around a community on Assembly. So how is the community that's sort of, because you've got 294 followers on Assembly for this project. I don't know how many are really actively involved or contributing ideas, but how do they help funnel this idea of monetization and the overall, what would be the architecture of how you build this product? So
this is kind of like a weird answer, but kind of not enough in some ways. I wish there was a little bit more, or I wish, I knew of people that I could just say, okay, this is my team of 5 people that I can ask these sort of high-level big questions to. Regarding the multi-tenant sort of ambitions, I think that I am planning a blog post. I might put it out tomorrow or Monday about this and sort of asking the community, what do they think? Do they have ideas? That kind of thing. I didn't want to publish that blog post until I had a little bit more concrete plan on how we would do it, which I'm going to outline in there. But in some ways, like, and it also sort of goes up and down. Like some weeks there will be no activity on assembly, and I'll like sort of post things in the chat, and it just goes quiet for a couple days or like a week. And then other weeks I'll get, people making bounties, people adding pull requests sort of every day.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of typical for all open source software, or at least in the beginning, in the early stages. But it's an odd thing to create a CMS, I think, because, or even any sort of big, I guess, app, and not just something that's a framework or a tool or a library, which I guess is what I'm used to. So, because, like,
your trajectory is so far, right? I mean, it can go so many different directions, and everybody has an opinion. And
I also just don't, like, if I put myself in somebody else's shoes, like, I would never use buckets. Like, who wants to build?
Did he just say that, Jerod?
I think he did. I'm trying to wait for the rest of the sentence.
Yeah, the punchline.
At this stage, I shall supplement it with at this stage. Like, who would build a website, for a client on alpha software?
Yeah.
Personally, I would not. And I don't expect anyone to. But at the same time, it's hard for somebody to play with something or to, experiment or test something, 10 to 15 hours a week when they're not doing something productive with it at the same time, Unless
they have the same pain as you and they want buckets to exist just because of the same ideas and the same pain points you've experienced, which is
exactly
a good builder experience and a good client level experience that surpasses others that are in your space.
Yep, totally. And I think I've had from assembly maybe 2 or 3 people who have really done a surprising amount, more than I expected, with certain parts of the app.
So how does that work when somebody wants to get involved with buckets via assembly? Do they just sign up and say, I'm here, I can help, I think this is cool, and you say, okay? Can you say no?
No, I can't say no, interestingly. I just had a spam sign up, the first one ever, like a week ago. I don't know if it was spam. Maybe the guy really, his grandma's really sick or something, but but I can't get him out of there. I think they're going to help me out with that at some point. But no, it's very much like you just described. In fact, if you go to assembly.com/buckets, they just revamped the sort of homepage feed, and you can see people's bios as they're signing up. They just pop in. And I think when they sign up for a project, Assembly asks them, hey, say a little bit about yourself. Why are you interested in buckets? And so they usually say, I'm a Java developer. I've played around with some Node, or, I'm more on the marketing side, but I'd love to help, that type of thing. And then I typically, I try to sort of give everybody a custom hello and make sure, they can find the things if they want to help, if they want to contribute. Like I'm always telling people, if you need a bounty, I think there's 100 some on assembly right now, because I basically will throw any idea I have into the bounties. If you want a bounty, literally just ping me, either IM me or Twitter DM me or hit me up in the assembly chat and just say, this is the type of stuff I like to do, and I'll find one for you. I can find one within 10 minutes. So
as the project owner, you create the bounties?
I think anybody can create the bounties. I hope anybody can.
Yeah, so if you sign up, anybody can create a bounty, anybody can create a discussion.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how the assignment of coins applies to that, but I'm assuming that's probably something that's on your side.
I don't know. Yeah, again, because I want to, but I don't play with sort of other people's projects much. I just don't have enough time. I would love to just jump in on somebody else's too. But yeah, so I know what it's like for me when I create a bounty, and it gives me sort of the coin interface, but I don't know what it looks like to anyone else.
It's kind of
I
interesting.
doubt they would just let you create a bounty with 0 coin value.
Yeah. You got to give up something, right?
Yeah.
Seems
And then
like
the interesting thing is every bounty dilutes the pool of coins. Is simply added on top.
So you're not subtracting from a whole. You're actually just adding to a
which
pile.
I actually like a lot, because
That's better.
you have, like, let's say you own 10% of buckets, it sort of guarantees that you have to keep doing something. Not a lot, but in fact, less so sort of exponentially over time. But you have to do something to maintain that 10% level,
Right. So, man, it sounds like this is a little bit Wild West in the sense of, okay, from a person who's trying to get involved, it's very speculative. You're investing. It's kind of like Kickstarter for open source to a certain degree, as far as you're not selling people, you're not trying to get people's money, you're trying to get their time, and you pitch them on your project. And for them, they're investing their time and their skills into something that they hope will make money at some point.
Yeah.
And yet somebody could come in and just completely harpoon this thing, right? By just being like a total loser contributor.
Totally. And that's where
It's risky.
We're a little bit, I think we're on the more special side of assembly in that way. There are products on assembly that are already making money. Okay. And again, I think this also comes back to, like, a CMS is a little bit different in that it's clearly like a long tail thing. It means establishing a community, a plugin system, all those things that are not going to be 6 months away.
I almost feel like they should be a little restrictive, though, because if you can't, I feel like for buckets, for this open source CMS that hopes to one day be a SaaS product that generates some revenue, I feel like for you want to be able to assemble a team that you don't personally know that you can attract people to and join a collaborative community that isn't on GitHub, because GitHub's more open source than it is assembly. But still have free reign of, like, who can join the team or not, like who earns their way.
So no, but you don't earn any coins unless you complete a bounty. Right,
of course. But, like, joining, the discussions and just sort of like spamming, like the one person you'd mentioned, I feel like
I'm kind of okay with that. I mean, that was only one sign up, and he had a weird thing about his grandmother in his bio. But but aside from that, it would get very little noise. And I would actually up to the other side of that, where I've actually, and I talked to the assembly guys, and I'm kind of friendly with them, and I actually push them to allow more anonymity within the app. For example, the chat, it would be great if anonymous people could join into the chat, I think. And I realize that's asking for a whole world of hurt. But at the same time, like, I'm sure you've seen products or sites where they have sort of an open Slack room that you can join if you have some sort of pre-install or pre-sales questions. And I actually like that, and if hopefully there are tools, for banning or whatever, spam types of things. But in general, even like, on GitHub, I like getting issues from random people. And that's another thing I've discussed, and I'm sort of in the process of discussing with Assembly is we're sort of debating whether or not to allow GitHub issues, because, it's clearly creates like a little bit of confusion over, okay, where do I put this bug? Is it bounty or is it a GitHub issue?
Right.
I kind of want them to open it up because, my sort of thought is not everybody who uses buckets is going to come from assembly. And GitHub is clearly in the developer community a pretty well-known, prominent tool. Everybody has an account. Everybody has used the issues before. But I see both sides of the coin there. But yeah, in general, I love the idea of as open as possible.
Let's pause the show for a minute. Give a shout out to a sponsor, TopTal. If you've listened to the show over the last year, you've definitely heard us talk about TopTal. We've seen firsthand the fruits and benefits of having TopTal in the community, helping marry really great opportunities for developers with really great developers. As TopTal says, elite engineers. I wanted to mention, because this is a Node.js focused show, You can actually hire top Node.js developers right now on TopTal. And if you are a top Node.js developer and you are not working with TopTal and you'd like to check out freelancing or go into some of that kind of stuff, you can go to toptal.com/Node.js. You'll find really awesome Node.js developers in their community already. And at the very top of the screen, you can see apply as a developer. Click that button right there. They'll take you through the process of actually becoming an elite engineer with TopTal. Go to toptal.com/Node.js. And now back to the show. We've talked a while. I guess we try to establish what size of the team you do have or don't have. So it seems like you're the core team right now.
Yeah.
Who else is on the team with you?
I would say, so nobody. I keep myself as the core team for now. Like I would absolutely adore to sort of promote somebody else to the core team. But I think as a core team, you get sort of, I forget, I think it's like 3 to 5% of all bounties is just sort of reserved for you. And that 5% I think is split among the core team. And not like I'm trying to sound greedy, but if somebody's going to, if I start splitting that and we get 2.5% each, like I just want to make sure it's somebody that's committed,
yeah,
into it. Yeah. And, so if somebody was just sort of knocking out bounties for like 2 months straight, I wouldn't hesitate. But anyway, for now, I'm the core team. I think if you were to look at our GitHub, I think we've had about 15 or so contributors. Some of them smaller than others, but I would say 10 to 15 people in general have really jumped up on the code side. So maybe 20 to 25 people total in terms of also design things, et cetera, on assembly.
Shout out to Charles Pletcher. He's got, let's see how many commits he's got. 69 commits.
So he's part of assembly. And,
okay. There you go.
He jumped on early on. And, he did some awesome, fantastic stuff for the templates and everything.
I've been sitting over here thinking it just sounds like what you're missing is a partner in crime. Like a second person, somebody more on the system back end ops side that really would just complement your talents. It seems like you're pretty well rounded, but to help make those big decisions,
I was thinking a lot about last year as I was like trying to do this sort of on my own. Was I just thought, if I just had that technical co-founder, that like dream thing everybody around here wants. But at the same time, I don't. I've done businesses and sort of apps and things with partners that I've met and just sort of reached out to and all kinds of things. And I just sort of thought, this is, for me personally, like much more of a long tail thing. And if there was that person, like I would want a lot of trust in that person. I just wouldn't want it to be something I post an ad on weekendhacker.com and somebody says, yeah, that's a great idea. Because it's just, it's great for getting off the ground, but it's that 2 years in and you guys have different ideas of how it becomes a business. I just didn't want to deal with any of that, which is a little not narcissistic, but it's a little limiting in that I'm like putting a lot on myself for now. But like I said, I'm open to it. If somebody,
seems like Assembly is a decent vetting solution for that, where you can, they can come in, put their time in, get some, I guess, equity over time, build up trust, show that they've got the skills, and then eventually could become that person.
I actually did offer it to Charles Pletcher, like a few months ago. I said, you should become part of the core team, because he clearly sort of knew what was going on in the architecture, and I think he had a good idea of where I was going. But he was like, I'm going to have to spend some time on other assembly projects and actually put in time for assembly itself. So he declined, but hopefully one day.
So if you're out there and you're a back-end hacker, as Jerod just described, and you like David, and you think that Buckets has a good direction, and you could just hop in, work hardcore for 2 months, and he'll promote you to core.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, if I were to describe my dream situation, I've completely loved working on the Node side, and I love working with Node. But like you said, like it's sort of more in that sysops realm that I just, it's not as fun for me. Like if I got to spend twice as much time just kicking out the user interface and doing more custom fields. Yeah. We need like relationships, types of fields. We need repeater types of fields. Anyway.
So we talked a ton about the product itself, but obviously this is the changelog. We like to get a little technical on this show. So you mentioned Node, obviously, MongoDB. I saw earlier in your history too, you moved from Rethink to Mongo. Mm-hmm. And I think that was for Windows. Is that still like, what were some of the reasons why you chose Node and chose Mongo, and why Node? So
Node was the easy choice because I just knew I wanted to do it in Node. The reasons for that are, partly convenience because I'm a front-end guy, and so JavaScript feels natural to me. It was partly an experiment because I just wanted to try something new. I think, and again, I'm more of a front-end guy, so I don't want to say the wrong thing, but looking at sort of the spectrum of all the different server-side tools and things you have now, I'm personally, I'll just never build a Java app. Ruby is, to me, Ruby seems like I'm going to get in trouble here, but sort of a childish equivalent of Node.
Yikes.
Yikes.
Not quite as, no, I think,
How so?
It's just not quite as impressive in terms of its scalability, right? And the sort of asynchronous, evented nature of Node actually allows for certain things. I think on the surface, they seem quite similar. But at the end of the day, in a lot of situations, Node is much, much faster. And for me, easier to develop in because it is JavaScript.
The evented model provides for that, right? So,
yeah, and
which you can do in Ruby, but it's not. The typical web frameworks are not using Event Machine, so they don't have that built right in, whereas Node does.
Yeah.
What about the back end? I think a document-based database makes a lot of sense because your CMSs are basically just storing a bunch of documents. Is that kind of where you started, and then you?
Yeah, and that again was partly an experimentation, and I still have people once a week warn me that MongoDB is going to start vomiting in my face at some point. But so far it's been great. It was something that, again, while I was at Sentia, I basically only worked on client-side projects for 3 years or so. And I saw sort of these, NoSQL or document-based databases were becoming really popular around then. That's a bit of a miss. Obviously, I was probably late to the bandwagon, but I saw a lot of that while I was there without actually using one. And I just, when you spend so much time with JavaScript and working with objects, the idea of using objects to query your database or to be able to inject objects into places within your database is just sort of extremely appealing. And that was sort of the initial impetus. And I started with Rethink just because I had heard sort of various war stories of Mongo. And Rethink seems to be sort of one of the cooler new kids on the block. But, a big reason I went with Mongo was just because of Mongoose in the Node ecosystem. It's just, to me at least, far sort of further ahead than any other sort of ORM, ODB type thing.
That's interesting. So the Mongoose library itself was the kind of the deciding factor there for you.
Yeah, definitely one of the bigger decision makers. Just the built-in validation, the relationship management. It was all just super, super straightforward.
I guess there's some symmetry there with your desire for clean user interfaces and thinking about that user experience. If you find an API that you really love and makes sense, it's a huge factor.
And that's another thing which I put a lot of sort of focus on within buckets, and it's I do say like it's my project, and so I do stuff in it that not everybody's going to like. It's how I like to program certain things, but in reality, again, this is highly contentious. Buckets is like 90%. Like if you look at the stats on GitHub, it's like 90% CoffeeScript. Like pretty much the entirety of Buckets, whether it's the front end user interface or it's the server side models and database connections, is all written in CoffeeScript.
Well, you're not going to have any arguments from me on that one, but I think most people would.
It's one of those contentious things, but
yes.
I just thought in the beginning, especially in the beginning, like, this is not something that people are just going to jump in and I'm going to start getting 20 pull requests a week, no matter what I write it in, right? And so I might as well write it in the thing that keeps me motivated and keeps, makes it the lowest sort of cognitive overhead for me to jump in and fix a bug.
Interesting. Do you think that has paid off as an early decision?
I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, there's always that sort of worry in the back of my mind that I'd have, 10x the contributors if it was in raw JavaScript. But again, it's that like, I like how the app looks, like in terms of the source code, like, and the dependency management and the modules, it's somewhat artificial, which I think is the problem. But I think people are getting more and more comfortable with that, with Grunt and Gulp and Browserify and all these things. People are starting to see how JavaScript can be sort of crafted in kind of a less gross, kind of loosey-goosey way, right? And I'm going to bring it old school now, but like JavaScript, for me at least, especially with ActionScript, is starting to look like sort of ActionScript 3 of 8 years ago or so, where you're importing classes or you're requiring classes, you're extending things. It's a whole different space.
Sure is. I think one thing we're going to link out to that may not quite fit into this call, but you've sort of talked in and around it, but is your vision document, which I think is pretty neat to have on your repo. It's just talking about the general philosophies and where you're heading for the future. So I think, is some of that replicated back in assembly to sort of because it's back in that space where do you send people to GitHub, to the repo, to a README, or a markdown file, or do you send them to assembly?
Yeah.
Like where do they handle that to kind of get interested?
Yeah. And so far, like assembly has a sort of main descriptor for the project, and then it's just sort of replaced that on the main page with a timeline for the project. But in general, like they've always been assembly has always been sort of more geared around the flow of things and the bounties and things like that. Like it's not like Basecamp where you have those. I forget what they called them, but they were Writeboard like 10 years ago. These like permanent, like we're going to edit, copy together kind of mini application. Yeah. And so I just wanted sort of a permanent place to store copy and just decided to throw it in there with GitHub. I do wish I was better about keeping these things in sync. It's like keeping your avatars in sync across different profiles. Like I just find myself, I'm just always tweaking copy for buckets, like whether it's the Twitter bio, or it's the GitHub homepage README, or it's the assembly front page. I don't have like one central thing and then like a press app or something.
Well, that leads into probably the first of our closing questions, which is, sort of a call to arms. So you sort of talked about your own keeping things in sync issues, but like if someone's listening to this, they love Node, they love JavaScript, they're getting into Node for, Node or just in JavaScript in general, and they're a front-end designer hacker and they want to sort of jump in, or that back-end person that's listening to the show, where do they go? What in what ways can the community step in and start helping you make this real if they want to? I
think the clearest path is definitely assembly. I think that's what it's there for. If you go to assembly.com/buckets, you get a lot of great basic info. Just sign up. It takes like a minute, and then you can just browse the bounties. And like I said, there's like 100 of them. You can, if literally none of them look interesting to you, just tell me what you are interested in doing, and I'll see if there's something there. I tell a lot of people, it's not just about, it's like not GitHub. It's not just about development. And it's also not just about design. I think like I would love to eventually, maybe it's a little soon for this, but like eventually just have sort of an advisory panel of people who make websites for other people. And just what do they want out of their systems? Like what do Drupal users really wish was part of it? Or what is somebody's pain points with Expression Engine? Those types of things, however minor, even just, recommendations or just feature requests are totally appreciated.
And our famous question, Jerod, which is who is your programming hero? Some people come on the show, they mention a few, some mention one. It's open ended. Who's your hero?
So I've been trying to think about this for the past hour. I'm going to go with 37 Signals is generally a huge source of inspiration. A lot of their inspiration is what goes into buckets. It's the idea that we could do something small, profitable, that's not VC backed, that is, profitable enough to sustain the people that work on it, and not necessarily start bringing in 50 million a year, but that sort of mentality, and the mentality that it can be a small team, it can be 10 people that make this thing that hundreds of thousands of people use. It's definitely a big inspiration.
Wow. Well, Dave, I know that we've had you on the show, like I said once before, back at episode 30. That's on the site. Y'all can go back and listen to him talk about Sencha with Win back in the day. But we're a fan of what you're doing. However we can support, we obviously want to support you in that endeavor. And anybody who's listened to the show, follow Dave and figure out what he's doing with buckets and see how you can plug in. We got a couple sponsors we want to give some thanks to for the show, because that's how we make this show possible, along with our awesome members who make it possible as well. CodeShip, DigitalOcean, and TopTal, super awesome partners. Those guys, all three of those sponsors pretty much help keep the changelog alive. So if you don't use CodeShip, you're not hosted on DigitalOcean, and you don't hire developers, or you're not an elite engineer through TopTal, we're just showing big old emoji sad faces around here. So next week we do have all things Perl with Curtis Poe.
Curtis,
right? That's what I said. Curtis.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, Curtis. We're excited about that because I think this might be our first, Jerod, of having Perl on the show. We've probably mentioned it, but never a project or someone that can come and speak to Perl the language.
Gonna get caught up.
Yeah, we're excited. So that's next Friday. We'll record, but that's what's coming up next. So that has been it for this show. Everybody on here, let's say goodbye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Bye.
A little bit of a unusual ending there on my side. Sorry about that, but
Codis. You said Codis.
Okay, I literally couldn't name a designer. So.
I was going to tell you to just name a couple, but
I could swear I said Curtis, not Codis.
Well, the audio won't lie. Aaron will tell you. I could have heard it wrong, but I thought you said Codis Poe.
No, maybe I did. I don't know.
Listen back. Listen to it back.
Next week, we do have all things Perl with Curtis Poe.
Curtis.
Curtis, right? That's what I said. Curtis.
Yep, that's right.